And now we're going to hit record in three, two. Welcome to another episode of Million Dollar Stories, where we get to interview authors from all over the world. Authors, you have the courage to put your thoughts down on a piece of paper to eventually change the world. And if you're looking to write a book out there, check out dreamstarterspublishing.com. They can help you with all those needs that an author needs to get their book out into the world. But also, if you have a book out there and you need to generate leads with it, check out bookmarketingcrm.com. And the book that we're talking about today is perfect for you out there who's starting a business or growing one, and trying to maybe make it a little bit more balanced, if you will. It is so chaotic when you're starting a business that there are probably some tricks that you can learn from this next individual. The book we're talking about is called The Portfolio Life: How to Future-Proof Your Career, Avoid Burnout, and Build a Life Bigger Than Your Business Card. And we have the author today, Christina Wallace. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start off with the genesis of this book. I'm assuming something happened in your life and you said, you know what, there's got to be a better way. And it became a recipe that you share with the many. Is that right?
It's true. It sort of had two catalysts. One was that I joke, but it's not entirely a joke, that I wrote this book to explain to my mother what I've been doing with my life. Um, and on the other hand,
Awesome.
I think a big part of this came out, I was blogging for Forbes for 3 or 4 years. I'd been doing small pieces of this content as TED Talks and other places. And I kept getting inbound from people who were coming across the information, the content, and saying, this resonates. I need more. And I wrote the book so that I could stop doing one-on-one conversations and try to get some scale on many of these ideas.
Nice. Yeah, what you just said really resonates with me. Uh, my mom for years had no idea what the hell I was doing, right? I would say, "Hey, I'm helping people write books." What do you do again? What? I don't understand. How does that happen? Right? So,
How does that pay your mortgage? Yeah.
yeah.
No, I mean,
Yes.
I give them a lot of credit. It's a very different world that we're building careers in than they did, and certainly than their parents did. And this notion that you would graduate from college, you would pick a major, and then you would do that for 60 years and then retire, it's just not realistic anymore. And so, they're looking at what you and I are doing and they're terrified. They don't understand how we're paying our bills or how we're ever going to have savings. And yet I look at that idea, that notion of go work for someone else and just be happy and stay there for a whole career, as way riskier than being in charge of building my own destiny. So
Mm.
I get that it's a little bit confusing. And that's part of why I think it's valuable to put a name to something like this, right? Suddenly, if you name it, it becomes legitimate. So instead of saying I have 5 income streams and 2 side hustles and whatever else, a hobby and whatever, you're like, no, I lead a portfolio life. And they're like,
Oh,
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Tell me more.
I like that. Yeah, that might simplify quite a few conversations. Now, in your
Mhm.
book, you do start off with, and this is awesome, you put in here, a brief
Mhm.
history of capitalism. The
Yes.
best definition that I think I've ever heard of capitalism is wealth through servitude. Three
Yeah.
words. It's so spot on.
Yeah.
And so, why did you put this in there?
Yeah, I did it in part because I think a lot of people feel like this is a new idea, that people have multiple interests, multiple passions, and that, the traditional life is one where you pick a thing and focus. And I wanted to point out that's just not true. That really is sort of maybe the most recent 100 years or so post-industrial economy. But prior to that, in the agrarian economy, in the world before we had factories and we needed workers to do one tiny little thing over and over and over again all day long for their whole lives, people had lots of interests. They had to. They had to know how to farm and to make soap and to repair their roofs and whatever else that they were doing to make money off of. And so, I went all the way back to Leonardo da Vinci, and I think I even have a phrase in there. If Leonardo da Vinci can do all these things, like why can't I? Right? It's a little bit ridiculous, but it's this notion that, like, we've always been multidisciplinary, complex human beings, and the idea that we should carve all of that interesting parts, away and shove them in a box in order to grow up and get serious is preposterous. And it serves capitalism. It serves the people at the top running the factories and the companies and the organizations, but it doesn't serve us as individuals.
Hmm. And so becoming more entrepreneur-like sounds like a recipe that you share out, right? Quit,
Absolutely.
quit, quit giving your soul to the corporations is my philosophy.
Hmm.
Take control of your own financial destiny, offer a service to the world, and therefore you are not dependent
Yeah.
on those individuals pulling the strings. Is that your
Absolutely.
philosophy too?
A
Yeah.
100%. And I think this is where one of the big insights when I came to business school, I don't come from a family of entrepreneurs. I come from a working class family that worked in factories and was secretaries. And really this entire world was new. But when I got to business school and I started learning about entrepreneurship and I learned about all these opportunities for building a future, I realized that so much of it was just shifting a mindset to say, I have the same skills I had before, but instead of selling them to one company, I'm going to look for a different business model where I can monetize them in other ways. Who else might need my skills? How might I be in control of my time and my talents and the value that I create in the world rather than giving it over to someone else in exchange for security? Because there is no security anymore. That
Right.
calculus doesn't exist. So it's the worst form of trade-off at this point to say, hey, I'm going to give you my time and my talents and my loyalty. And the next downturn and the next round of layoffs, you're still on the chopping block. So get in that CEO seat for your life, whether it's as an entrepreneur or just having the entrepreneurial mindset that you are directing the choices that you make. You're not waiting for a manager to hand them to you.
Man, you're speaking my language. And there's a part in your book you talk about this, writing a new playbook. The old playbook doesn't work. Trothing your long-term commitment to a company in exchange for one of my favorite words, for an identity,
Yeah.
some financial stability, and a chance to climb the corporate ladder is no longer a lucrative trade. So
Yeah.
what does an alternative model look like? And I'm assuming you talk a little bit about workism. I think it's a phrase
Yes.
that you use. Can you explain that real quick?
Yeah, I got this off of I think Derek Thompson wrote about this the first time in the Atlantic. Workism is this basically it's a religion, right? Where you find your identity, your purpose in your work. It's a very American thing, I have to be honest. And it's a really dangerous religion. It's a dangerous idea to connect with because if your work is taken from you, if your job is taken from you, you lose your identity in the same conversation. It's terrifying. You're literally putting your identity in someone else's hands. And so it's the challenge to say, who are you beyond how you are currently monetizing your time? Like, what do you bring to the table? What do you value? Who are you? What is the essence of what you bring? And being able to separate identity from work becomes this unlock for the entire portfolio life model. Because when you recognize I'm more than just what I do today, you can see all of the options that you have available as you want to or have to pivot and be responsive to the constant disruption that we're getting every third Tuesday at this point.
Yeah, that's right. You have four pillars:
I do.
identity, optionality, diversification, flexibility. I like these
Mhm.
pillars. Diversification, people don't realize that if you only have one revenue stream,
Mhm.
you think that when you start a business, I don't know if you're a spiritual person,
Mhm.
but it's like, do you read the Bible at all? Are you familiar with it?
I grew up very deep in that world.
Okay, so when Moses frees the Israelites from the people of Egypt,
Mhm.
you think that they're leaving tyranny and then they're free forever and they're happy. Well, they go into the desert, but there is no direction, right? They're still
Mhm.
dependent on some type of vision.
Mhm.
And so there's no way of, producing an abundant life because they're still out in the desert, they're still lost. And I look
Mhm.
at that as when you quit a corporate job and you start a business and you have only one revenue stream, you are still not free. You are
Yeah.
not free. So create many revenue streams. Therefore, you have some possibility. You have
Yeah.
abundance in your life. And that's what I think of when I hear the word diversification. But
A
anyway,
hundred percent. No, I literally came to this model through diversification first, honestly. That when I started learning about financial portfolios at business school, because this is not a conversation we had around my dining room, table at dinner time growing up, I was like, this is genius, right? Like you can't plan for these external forces, these disruptions or the movements of the market. So you can diversify and be prepared for that. You can literally do the math to construct a financial portfolio that says, I don't know which way it's going to go, but I'm going to set this up in a way that I don't have correlation, that I have this diversification. So no matter what happens, my portfolio will be okay. And I thought that is genius. And why don't we do that for our jobs? Why don't we do that for our lives? Like, we go all in on something. And particularly as an entrepreneur, the first business that I started, I immediately quit my job and was all in on this thing. And everyone around me was like, especially the venture capitalists who were writing me checks, were like, you got to be all in 7 days a week, all in, all in. And I was like, wait a second, you're diversified. You, the investor, you've got 10 or 20 or 30 checks in this fund. If I fail, it doesn't end things for you, but it ends things for me. So even though I'm focused, I'm very invested in where this goes, how can I still have diversification in my life? And yes, it's from revenue streams, but it's also from things like, am I taking care of my health?
Oh, good deal. Yes.
Am I investing in my relationships? When my first company failed pretty dramatically, so much so that Harvard Business School wrote a case study on my failure that we taught for a decade on how not to become me. It's in that moment of failure, I was like, I am 20 pounds overweight. My blood pressure's through the roof. I haven't spoken to friends in months. I'm single. Like, all of these things I had put on hold in order to go all in. And I realized that had not served me at all. I still needed the other components of my portfolio there to support me. So even if you're really focused and saying, this is going to be a chapter of my life where I can't have 17 hobbies and I can't do like the things that I used to do, you still have to be thoughtful about how are you getting your needs met. And those are physical and emotional and spiritual needs, as well as your ambition, your financial needs, your goals that you want to achieve there.
How we were taught to measure success, power,
Mhm.
money, prestige, how we
Mhm.
should measure. And I look at this and I automatically see the wheel of life, right? Your
Yeah.
spokes, right?
Yeah.
Is your spiritual side intact? Is your financial side intact? Your physical side, right?
Mhm.
All of it needs to be strong. As you talk about
Yes.
relationships, health, growth, free time, and work you enjoy.
Yeah.
So that is a way you measure success now. But also, I do want to talk about the word identity.
Yeah.
This new identity that you were creating. There is
Mhm.
I think I call it cognitive dissonance,
Yeah.
where two things are true at the exact same time,
Yeah.
but you're migrating from one island to the next. So at
Mhm.
one point, you really do have to let go, very much like in Castaway, where he lets go of
Mhm.
Wilson. There's a
Mhm.
moment where you have to completely distance yourself from
Yeah.
who you used to be.
Yeah.
Scary moment, but this new identity you're creating has to be attractive enough to you that you are all in on that new identity. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. And for me, I had the great luck of having a failed company, because in that moment, my identity was no longer available. I was the founder and CEO of Quincy Apparel until the day I was not. And then in that moment, I was like, I have to go out. I need to talk to people. I need to ask for help. I literally don't know how to introduce myself. At this point in my career, I'd been a theater director. I'd worked in opera. I had an MBA, 11 and a half months of management consulting, and 2 years of a failed fashion company. Like, what on earth did I have to offer anyone? How was I supposed to introduce myself in a way that didn't come across as a complete flake? And I was like, I don't think I'm a flake, but I say those words out loud, and you're like, Chick is a hot mess, and like, I don't know how to help you. And so I had this like complete reckoning of, what is the connection between all of those things that I've done? Because I have done them all because they're authentic to me. So what is the connection between them all? And what is my through line that I still have to offer? And that was the moment where I really came out of this thinking, I've been using this phrase ever since. I'm a human Venn diagram. I sit at the intersection of business, technology, and the arts, and I always have.
Mm.
I was a math major and a theater major, and I've loved technology and I love the business world. And crucially, in any room that I'm in, I can speak their language, but I also bring the ideas and the language and the network of the rooms not represented, or the groups not represented in that room. And so that interdisciplinary spot, like, that's literally who I am and what I have to offer. That is a way of thinking. It's a mindset. It's how I approach problems and teams. It's not, what is my job today? And so that's a piece of that identity where you walk away from like, what is the thing I do day in and day out? And you have to almost like find that higher level of what's the through line of who I am and how I see the world and what people come to me for. And this is where I offer the 3 questions. If you're like, this is a great idea, but I literally don't know how to answer that, like, who am I? Who am I, Christina? Um, I went out in this moment where I was trying to find these dots. I went out and did coffee chats with my friends and my network. I needed their help because I was feeling so lost. I couldn't see it for myself. And, I did 70 coffee chats in 30 days. You don't need to do this much coffee. It was overkill, but
70
70,
coffee chats. So it's basically almost a little
like
more than two a
two and a
day.
half
What
a
are you
day. Yeah,
talking about?
it was a lot. It was a lot of coffee. And I made them pay for the coffee because I was so broke. um, but I asked them the same 3 questions. I said, when have you seen me happiest? Because I was really struggling to remember, like, what are the circumstances that bring out the best version of me? Number 2 was, what do you come to me for? Like, what's that moment you're like, I should see what Christina thinks about this. And the third was, where do I stand out against my peers? Like, is there a piece of me that I don't even realize is a superpower because it's just so natural to me, but you're like, yeah, no one does it that well. And so pulling out this data across all of these connections who'd seen me in all these different contexts really gave me a grounding to understand, like, I'm a storyteller. I'm someone who can connect the dots and find that associative thinking, that cross-disciplinary thinking. And and I bring worlds together that otherwise don't have a reason to know each other, right? It's that sitting at that intersection, that orthogonal network is a big piece of who I am and why anyone would want me in the room.
Hmm. Wow. So if you're struggling, ask those around you that you trust the most a little bit about who you are, what they think of you, what they believe in you for, right? All the
Mhm.
stuff that you might have the answers, but you need to hear it from those
Yeah.
around you first.
Yeah. It's amazing once you get enough data points on this of people who have seen you in all these different contexts, you're going to start to really hear some consistent themes because the people who know you, they can actually see you. And it's kind of it's weird the first time you ask because you're like, I'm literally asking you to coffee so that you can tell me I'm amazing.
Yeah.
And like call that out. Just say that. Be like, I know this is super awkward, but I need your help. And the people who love you are thrilled to like talk about what's amazing about you, right? Like we love talking about our friends and how cool they are. Give them the opportunity to give you that gift.
So you talk a little bit about failure in this too. I think it's
Mhm.
one of the early chapters. Yeah, chapter 3, a caveat, failure. In my opinion, whenever I hear you talk about that big failure, right?
Yeah.
It's maybe the moment in your life that, you hit a ground zero moment. Maybe there are
Yeah.
many other ground zero moments after that, but if for the very first time you experience rejection from the world, but
Mhm.
also maybe some judgment from those around you, like this person's insane. And so some people can't really handle that one moment of failing, not just
Yeah.
knowing they fail, but for others to see them to fail.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it's very much like Jordan Peterson says that
Yeah.
when you start to put yourself out there and you start to tell the truth of who you are and you let the world see who you really are,
Mhm.
so much truth will burn away all the things that you're not. And in my opinion,
Mhm.
failure burned away a lot of things that were
Mhm.
not true about me anymore. Like
Yeah.
who I was as a person, what I wanted. I realized there was a little bit left of me. And that's when I was able to build my life the right way. It
Yeah.
took 4 major failures and then my fifth one succeeded. And I just
Yeah.
interviewed someone who failed 25 times and they're the
Wow.
26th one. So maybe it just takes more times for the average person to, get rejected because it's actually cutting away a lot of stuff that they're not and
Mm.
teaching them more about themselves that gives them an advantage in that next round. So
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about that next move you made after
Yeah.
that big failure?
Yeah, I mean, the failure was, it felt devastating in the moment. I was 28 and I literally had never failed at anything
You were
in my
Harvard,
life.
right?
I was Harvard. The closest thing I had to a failure at that point was a B plus in differential geometry my sophomore year of college, where I was like, I don't know if I can do this major anymore. I think I should drop it. And my advisor's like, what are you talking about?
Because you got a B
So
plus, or you straight A student the entire life.
my entire life.
Amazing.
Like I don't understand not being the best, right? Like that's just my identity. And here's the problem with that narrative. The narrative, and I felt this in the moment where I finally failed at something very dramatically. Um, when you tell yourself that story, I'm someone who succeeds, the older you get and the more that you feel that's true, the less you are willing to take a chance on something that feels like it might not succeed, right? Because it would be contrary to who you are if it didn't work out.
Good
And so you
point.
start shying away from risk. And the whole point of diversification is that you can build the risk you need into your portfolio to take some big swings. You can take some big swings and they don't all have to pan out, and the diversification saves you. But if you are saying, I can't fail at anything because that's not who I am, then you build a safer and safer and safer life. And you're not actually doing any of the things that matter or bring you the fulfillment that you wanted when you were young, when you didn't know the cost of failure. So I am thrilled that I failed so dramatically at 28. It was freaking
Freeing.
hard.
It was freeing, it sounds
It
like.
was freeing when the worst thing you can imagine happens to you and you're still alive after it. Like it's like drinking Red Bull. You're kind of like, okay, game on. So I had an opportunity in that moment that I was like, okay, we're going to change the narrative because clearly I don't succeed at everything. I failed this time. And the narrative is now one that I show up and I work my butt off. That's true. That has always been true. And it doesn't always work out. Sometimes I meet the edge of my abilities, and that becomes the direction of where I need to learn going forward. Great. I suck at managing people. At 28, it was the first time I'd done it and I was terrible at it. Now I know what I got to go work on. I should not be building a company in the fashion space. I don't have any particular insight or information on asymmetry there. Like, what am I doing? Go find the worlds that I have something that I can provide a unique insight into. Like, it gave me the template of where to go from there. So I got back on my feet, and crucially to your point of like the fear of people seeing you fail, right? It's not just that you failed; it's that you're perceived as a failure. Um, at least in the startup world, I went out and was doing these coffee chats, was going into these interviews, I was so broke. I literally paid my rent with a cash advance on my credit card. I had to get a job. And no one held that failure against me. No one was like, tell me about that failure. They all said things like, what'd you learn from it?
Yeah.
Right? Under what conditions would you try again? What are you taking out of this, and like where are you going next? Like how can you build off of this? So it surprised me, like the tech press got some really great headlines and clickbait off of the glee with which they reported the failure, but everyone else was kind of like, welcome to the club, like we all have done that, now you're a real entrepreneur.
Yeah, you need that stripe. You need that scar, right?
Yeah. And I am so grateful that we told the story so honestly about the failure from the beginning, because I have now so many friends over the last 15 years who've had what what we would all consider a failure, right? Like an acquihire or an acquisition for less than the capital that they raised. And so they get to put the spin on, I had a landing, I had an exit. But everyone knows, even though no one is saying the words out loud, that it was not a successful outcome for the business. But because they spin it, they can never tell the truth of the failure. And now they know that they're lying. We know that they're lying, but they have to hold on to that forever.
Hmm.
That's hard. I find that so much more limiting than just owning up to it and being like, yep, totally fell on my face, didn't work. And here's what I did next.
Yeah. Well, you talk a little bit about Dr. Martin E.P. Seligman. Now, I
Yeah.
probably have heard of this individual's teachings, but I
Mhm.
never really knew this name. And you say
Yeah.
he's the so-called father of positive psychology,
Yes.
dedicated his career to research on failure, helplessness, and optimism. And he learned that the way people respond to extreme adversity is normally distributed. Some struggle with depression, many bounce back after initial negative reactions, and some show considerable growth, eventually ending up better off than they were before the trauma. And you
Hmm.
go down here, and I'm looking at the top five. It says Dr. Seligman outlined 5 behaviors known to contribute to post traumatic growth. Number one,
Hmm.
accept your response to failure. including shattered beliefs about yourself, which is what you talked about.
Hmm.
Number two, reduce anxiety by controlling intrusive thoughts, including by recognizing when negative emotions are out of proportion to the reality of the threat you are facing. Number three, be open and honest about your failure. Another thing you talked about. And then
Hmm.
here's another one that really caught my eye: engage in constructive storytelling in which failure is seen as a fork in the road. This is
Hmm.
huge, right?
Yeah.
For TED Talks, for showing the vision of the company, to
Hmm.
really mold with someone else out there or to resonate with them.
Hmm.
And then number five, articulate your personal principles, be explicit and intentional about where you go from here. So
Hmm.
this outline that you provide most likely to people out there reading this book,
Hmm.
if they use it, right?
Hmm.
Don't be used by it. Use this failure.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like you decide where you go from here, right? This is a dot over the course of your life. How do you want to respond to this? Do you get stuck and this becomes the thing that you can never get away from, that it becomes the thing that makes you take less risk and be less willing to live your authentic life? Or does it become the thing that actually shows you as a mirror, right? Here's who you are, here's where you struggle, here's what you have to learn. But like you're the man in the arena, right? The Teddy Roosevelt speech.
Yep.
You went out and actually did the thing. And this time it didn't work. So the big part that I really try to emphasize in those moments of kind of reckoning with that failure, and this is part of the like, don't let your emotions kind of get out of proportion to what happened. Recognize your contributions to it, of course, but also recognize what was out of your control. Right. I think some of us say, well, it was all the world's fault. Like I could have succeeded if it hadn't been for blank.
Yep.
And then some of us say it was all my fault. Everything I did was terrible. It was all on me. I'm a horrible person. I will never succeed again. I shouldn't have done this. And neither of those extremes are true. And so part of this is recognizing what did you contribute, and that becomes your playbook for what you want to learn next. And the other part is recognizing how much of life is not in your control. And it could have been in a different time, in a different city, in a different zip code, you would have succeeded. but this moment it didn't work. And so I think that's freeing too, right? Part of life is not in our control. And as a control freak, um, I just have to own that, you know?
Well, you have the four pillars, and
Hmm.
I mean, I'm hearing a lot of things that that really make me think of my journey and what I was able to learn from it. And
Hmm.
so whenever I started to build the schedule that I wanted rather than to react to the schedule that was given to me,
Yes.
is whenever things started to really, I guess you could say, become smoother, become easier. And I looked forward to Mondays. I looked
Yeah.
forward to every day. I looked forward to Saturdays even, because
Yeah.
I knew that I was working for a certain amount of time, but then I would give myself a little bit extra time. So I was building the schedule that I wanted, and
Yeah.
that is what allowed me to not burn out. There are periods, maybe these are different seasons in my life, where I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, I need to go all in on creating a lot of digital assets. So this
Yep.
is going to be a very tough time, but come summer, I'm going to dwindle down my schedule so I can really enjoy the fruits of my labor. So,
Yeah.
in the portfolio life, do you have
Yeah.
anything in regards to creating the schedule that you want?
Absolutely. I mean, you hit on the exact word. It's seasons, right? We have seasons or chapters of our lives, and sometimes it's within the year, as you were sort of saying. There's like a lumpiness to where you have these stress points and where you can create a little bit more freedom. But sometimes these seasons or chapters are multi-year things, right? I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. For the last 4 years, I have been in a season of diaper changes and middle of the night wake ups, and from 5 o'clock until 9 o'clock at night is the bedtime stretch of death. Like it goes on forever, right?
Bedtime stretch of death.
And so this is a chapter, right? This isn't forever. But when I entered this chapter of my life, I realized I needed to redesign entirely my portfolio, how I put together my schedule, how I thought about my time and my commitments and my week. All of those things had to be intentionally redesigned for this chapter of life. And when they get to kindergarten, when they start sleeping through the night, I'm told it comes someday, then I can redesign again. And so there's both like the local seasonality and then like the global seasonality that you can think through. Because when I asked my friends when did they see me happiest, Their consistent answer was, when you're in control of your schedule.
Mm.
You're not afraid of working hard. You work your tail off, but you want to do it on your terms. You want to do it on your timeline. And if you want to go to Pilates at 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday and write the 6th chapter of your book all day Sunday, you want the ability to do that. And you don't want someone else telling you you can't. And I was like, that's correct. So I need to find and build and design a life where I am in control of my calendar. And that is one of the biggest fundamental pieces that have kept me as an entrepreneur and now as a professor, right? I don't have a manager. That's the important thing. So a big part of this is designing. And as you start having other people in your life, a partner, children, whatever that looks like, maybe parents that you have to take care of, you start to think through not just your seasonality, but theirs as well. And how do you want to design, right? Even when I am looking at my crunch periods for the academic year, I know what that lumpiness looks like. I have to layer on, my husband is a public servant. He runs a town. They have legislative session twice a year where he works really, really hard until like midnight every day for 2 weeks. I have to layer that in to say, I'm going to have to pull 90% of the family responsibilities during those weeks. So I better not be adding in crunch times professionally as well. And we have to design this, right? It's intentional. You don't just let life happen to you. That's when you get burned out and overwhelmed.
Mm. Yeah, we did a book with a guy named Ryan Shalaba. He wrote a book called Your Perfect Average Day.
Mm.
And he was helping me while we were doing the book of, outlining not the perfect day, right? People think that
Mhm.
when you say, hey, what's your perfect day look like? Oh, I'm going to fly to Tahiti to have lunch and I'm going to go to New York City.
Yeah.
What's the perfect average day look like?
Yeah.
And it's pretty cool to start to analyze how simple it can be. Wake up,
Mhm.
read a little bit, have a nice breakfast, have a nice
Mhm.
coffee, do a little bit of work. In my opinion, if I get a sale within the company, that's a big sale that keeps everybody running. There you
Yeah.
go. Then I go for
Yeah.
a run. Then I go for
Yeah.
a motorcycle ride. Then I play with the dog,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Perfect average
Each
day.
day.
Pretty simple. So if I
Yeah.
get that, it's like, that's a win.
Yeah.
And maybe that perfect average day is more manageable than you think. So it's
Yeah.
not too far out of reach.
Yeah. No, I love that idea of the perfect average day, because often when people are like, how do I know when I need to rebalance my portfolio? Like, how do I know when it's a new chapter or a new season? And I was like, honestly, my gut check is, do I have more good days than bad? Right? Like at the end of a week, a month, a year, have I had more good days than bad? Am I happy?
Mhm.
Like that's my definition of it. More good days than bad. And those can be really stressful days, but you're like, yeah, I killed it. It was a lot of work, but like you go home and you got a smile on your face. Your partner can tell it was a good day. And you're like, oh, that was a good day. When that flips, when you have more bad days than good, that's the friction telling you something's out of whack, that either it's a new season of life, the model that you had set up isn't working now that you have different commitments and priorities, or the distribution of that you had has changed. Maybe you have a new manager, or your industry has completely changed the economics and they're not really working for
Mhm.
the business model that you created. Now it's time to reimagine what that model looks like. Whatever that is, when you have that reflection to say, I've got more bad days than good, like that's your signal. It's time to do something different.
Ooh, it's a great way to put it. Yeah. If you start to notice that things are not working in your favor as they once did, you need to make an adjustment, which
Yeah.
is probably one of the pillars, being flexible,
Yes.
making those adjustments when necessary, when your
Yes.
gut instincts, your
Yeah.
intuition's telling you it's time.
Yeah. I say this to all of my students, that the only failure that I actually truly see as failure, as a negative failure and not a learning opportunity, other than, like defrauding people or hurting people, is when you learn that something isn't for you and then you don't do anything about it.
Oh,
when
yeah.
you when you recognize a relationship isn't working, when you see that a job is not the right fit, when you are saying this business model is not working for my life, but I'm just going to keep trying, like, you have information that this isn't working, but rather than make a change, you just suck it up and keep doing the same thing. Like, that's the failure that I would really feel disappointed in.
Yeah. I was just listening to a podcast this morning with Sage Steele. Do you know who that is?
Hmm.
She was on Patrick Bet David's show. Do you know who that is?
I don't.
Okay. So she's on, I'll probably listen to the whole thing, but she was saying something along those lines where
Yeah.
the moment that she was being told to do certain things at ESPN and then ended up doing it, she felt like a sellout. Like her gut instincts were saying,
Hmm.
don't do this, but I have to do this to keep the job.
Hmm.
That was the moment that she felt like a failure,
Yeah.
right? Knowing you need to do something, but you didn't.
Yes.
It's something that stays with you, that feeling. And therefore, either it will put you into a state of depression,
Hmm.
or you will never be that version of yourself ever again, and you'll never let it happen to you. So you can use
Yeah.
it as a
Yeah.
launch pad.
100%. I mean, this is where I see people who say, "Oh, I'm getting divorced. It feels like a failure." I'm like, no, if you recognize that this relationship is no longer serving you, I give you so much credit that you're walking away from it. You're saying, I need to shut down my company. It was working. And I got to a point where it was a slog every day and I wasn't enjoying it and I wasn't making money and it was a albatross around my neck. And I'm like, great. You learned about something that wasn't working for you and you're making a brave choice to change something in your life.
Mm.
That it can only be celebrated.
So to kind of, I mean, I don't want to take too much of your time, but real quickly,
Hmm.
can you break down what happened after that first failure
Hmm.
to getting your life, I guess, back to the surface,
Yeah.
to then finding obviously and building a family, finding a
Yeah.
partner, building a family.
Yeah.
What happened there, and what was the reason you think it all started to culminate and become
Yeah.
a
There,
success?
there were a couple of kind of inflection points. Getting back on track, I got a good enough job, a rebound job. I joined a startup based in Boston to help build their New York ecosystem. It kept me there. I built their campus and hired people and then helped them scale to Chicago and Berlin and London. So like got my mojo back as an entrepreneur. And then I went out and raised $7.5 million of philanthropic capital and built an ed tech startup focused on girls and computer science inside the American Museum of Natural History. So got to go hang out with the dinosaurs, work with girls, teach them how to code, figure out how to kind of tackle a big problem that I had been frustrated by a long time. And while I was there, I'd been going on a bunch of really bad dates for a very long time. I had this like season. I mean, New York dating is absolutely miserable. Anyone will tell you that. But I had this season of like I kept dating these people that on paper looked like they should be my partner, and in real life it was not a fit. And I was like, okay, what is wrong? This isn't working. And I'm so good at so many other things in my life, and I'm so bad at this. So I took myself on a relationship offsite. I went camping alone in Maine for a week with like a whiteboard and like mapped out. I did a retro basically on my relationship history of like, what was I doing? What was my decision criteria? When was I going into the sort of committing to this? And long story short, I realized that I was doing kind of two things wrong. Number one, I was using online dating, which everyone does at a certain point, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I was using it like a resume review, right? Like I was like, okay, well, what college did you go to? How tall are you? Are we going to photograph well together? Right? Like, because that's the information that you can get off of
Yeah,
online
that's
dating,
right.
right? Are you a good person? Are you generous? Are you interesting? Do you love your work? Are you kind to waiters? Like you don't get any of that information off of online dating. And so it was feeding me the wrong data. I was using the wrong data to make this decision. And number two, and this has always been my downfall in relationships. I was going on these dates and sort of seeing who they could be, right? Like I could draw the outline of like they could be an amazing person, and I got really attached to who they could be. And as they showed me who they were and it didn't line up with who they could be, I ignored that
Wow.
data, that information, and I was like, yes, but they could be this amazing person. And so I would stay with them 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and I knew on the first date that this wasn't it. So I constructed a sales funnel for my dating life and treated it like a business problem. And I used online dating purely for sourcing, and then got it offline as quickly as possible so that I could get a sense of like, is this someone I want to spend time with? And I tried to lower the bar of like, do I want to have dinner with them? Like, not are they the one? It's just like, do I want to spend 3 hours across the table from this person? And try to like build up from there. And I met my husband, I don't know, 6 dates into this. And we've been together ever since. And he is, like me, a human Venn diagram. He's a lawyer by training, a public servant by profession, an actor and writer and podcaster and guitar player in his free time. He is everything that I could have ever wanted. And like, what it's fascinating because if you follow our geography, we lived within 3 blocks of each other like 4 different times over 10 years. We have mutual friends and we never met until I was like 32. Um, and that's how we got here. It was a pretty easy yes when we met.
Wow. Treat it like a business.
Treat
Yeah,
it
I'm
like a
with you
business
on that.
problem.
Hey, and if you have a strength in business, apply that elsewhere. I'm telling you,
Absolutely.
there is a skill set that you've acquired that can be leveraged wherever you go.
Absolutely.
And I like that. Okay, so where are you located nowadays?
I'm in Cambridge now, up by Harvard.
Very nice. Okay, good deal. And so tell us a little bit about what do you do outside of Preach the Portfolio Life? Tell us a little bit about your business.
So by day, I am a professor of entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School. I teach all the MBAs and the exec ed. And by night and weekends and afternoons and 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm a Broadway producer. I have a theater production company with two of my friends, and we invest in and produce musicals and plays in the commercial theater space in New York, and are working to get more people, particularly from the entrepreneurship world, who understand investing, who understand business building, but might not understand Broadway as an asset class, getting them excited to be part of funding and building the next generation of art.
Wow. Then you really have married all your passions. It's
I
awesome.
have.
That's great. That's excellent, man. Phenomenal. So you're still teaching and you're still running the business and you're
Mhm.
raising money and obviously helping Broadway plays get off the ground while providing some type of an investment strategy for those who, like you said, may not understand that asset class. And I've been
Yeah.
learning more and more about it as I get around people who really have a crazy portfolio.
Yeah. There you go.
So very cool. All right, Christina Wallace. Outside of your own book, last question I have for you. Outside of your
Yeah.
own book, is there one that you recommend to our audience? I always talk about
Yes.
Rich Dad Poor Dad. It changed my life. Is there
Yes.
anything like that for you?
There is. It is called How Will You Measure Your Life by Clay Christensen. He was my professor at Harvard Business School. He's known for his theory of disruption and all of the business research that he put out in the world. But How Will You Measure Your Life was a book that he wrote based off of the talk he gave the very last day of class when he had been diagnosed with brain cancer. And we thought it might be the very last time he was teaching. We got 10 more years with him. It turned out okay in the short run. But in that moment, he was the one that really put that bee in my bonnet around you. You manage what you measure. So what are you measuring, and how are you putting the effort into your life, your relationships, your health, your happiness? The same effort that you're putting into your work.
How you measure your life.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta look that up. I've never heard of it. It's
Yeah,
awesome. Thanks for that recommendation.
of course.
And is there a website or a social media channel people can find you on that you're very active?
ChristinaWallace.com is where all of my work lives. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably where I post the most. And if you're interested in the book itself, portfoliolife.com, you sign up for the mailing list, and I'll send you a free workbook that helps you kind of go through all of the exercises and work you kind of like a little sidekick.
Ooh, okay. Good stuff. Guys, the book is called The Portfolio Life. I guess theportfoliolife.com. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
portfoliolife.com.
And it's how to future-proof your career, avoid burnout, and build a life bigger than your business card. It's resonating with people on Amazon, over 70 reviews, and yeah, it seems like it just came out even just last year, about a year ago. So
Mhm.
well done on this book. If you
Thank
guys can
you.
pick it up, reach out to her on social media and get that workbook. I recommend it. She's obviously on the ball with some things. So, Christina Wallace, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Remember, guys, $1 million book will lead to $1 million life. Right on.